Peace and love, everyone. Welcome to our continuing series, Gibran in Arabic. We are in episode 6, part of the Nostalgic Remembrance Project, part of which is housed under the Adwaq Center for Spirituality, Culture, and the Arts. And we are continuing with the Rasail, Arabic letters of Khalil Gibran, where we are doing live translations of these letters, and we are continuing with the third, I believe, letter, or even second letter that Gibran is writing to a contemporary poet and friend of his, Amin al-Gharaib, who was, like Gibran, a migrant living in diaspora in America, and he had was returning back to Lebanon, and Gibran was preparing himself for a trip to Paris, to spend about a year in Paris, in the capital of art and creativity, as he calls it. And we're continuing now. Gibran asks his friend in this letter, Amin, who at this point should have reached Lebanon. He says, كيف وجدت لبنان? How did you find Lebanon? هل رأيته جميلا مثل ما كان يصوره شوقك وحنينك إليه? Have you found it, have you seen it beautiful, like it was shown to you by your longing and ardent longing for it? أم ألفيته بقعة جرداء يسكنها الخمول بجوار الكسل? Or did you find it like a barren land, a barren region that is inhabited by laziness, or khumul, dormancy, the neighbor alongside laziness? And this is really powerful, right? This is important to think about. First of all, politically, I think it's really remarkable that that we're reading this now, almost a century, perhaps more than a century after Gibran had sent these letters. This letter was sent in 1908. So it's almost a century and 10 years, a century and a decade now, old, this letter that Gibran has sent to his friend Amin al-Gharaib. And Lebanon, a beloved country to all Arabs, the capital of Khalil Gibran, the capital of now Marcel Khalifa, the famous Lebanese poet and musician, finds itself in a similar position, a similar condition that Gibran is hinting towards here. And it's really heartbreaking to find Lebanon in such turmoil and such economic turbulation and political turbulation and tumult as it is right now. But what Gibran does here, if you remember, we were talking about Gibran's rhetorical genius, right? And his ability to perform and to embody his intentions through his rhetoric. So when he asks Amin al-Gharaib, he says, did you find Lebanon beautiful as it was shown to you by your longing, or did you find it as a barren region, a barren land, a barren piece of land that is inhabited by dormancy alongside laziness? Remember, in the previous paragraph, as we were describing yesterday, Gibran was talking about that the most beautiful things are those not seen by the eye or heard by the ear or touched by the senses. So what Gibran is doing here is he's continuing with that line of contemplation and saying, are you seeing the Lebanon of the senses, which is a land and a country burdened by difficulties? Or are you seeing the Lebanon in spirit, the one that your imagination longs for, the one that is filled with beauty and life. Right? هل هو ذاك الجبل الذي تغنت بوصف محاسنه قرائح الشعراء من داود إلى سليمان إلى أشعيا إلى جرمانوس فرحات إلى لامختين إلى نجيب الحداد أم مجموع تلال وأودية خالية من الأنس بعيدة عن الظرف أو عن الظرف مكتنفة بالوحشة. He said, is it that mountain? Right? Because remember, Gibran was born in the town of Bishabi, which is a mountainous region. And Lebanon is filled with mountains. He said, is it that mountain about whose beauty sang the ranks of poets from, and he begins by mentioning prophets, David and Solomon. And it's interesting that he calls these prophets poets, right? David and Solomon, to Ash'iyah, who's one of the prophets of the Israelites, to Jarmanos Farahat, who is a priest, an Orthodox priest, Greek Orthodox priest, to Lamartine, a French poet, 20th century 18th, 19th century French poet, who is, like Gibran, one of the paragons and custodians of the Romantic period, to Najib Haddad, who is a 19th century poet, Lebanese, and literateur who lived in Egypt? Or is it just a group of hills and barren valleys that are empty of intimacy, free of any humor, filled, and look at this beautiful expression, filled with loneliness. Filled with loneliness. So Gibran here is continuing with the same rhetorical genius that we talked about, right? So in the previous paragraph, he establishes the metaphysics, and this is Gibran's way, right? To always begin with a metaphysical foundation. In poetry, in eloquence, in conversation, he begins by saying that the most beautiful things are those not seen or heard or touched or felt by the senses. And then we said he goes on to ask his friend Amin al-Ghayyib, how did you find Lebanon? The one that the physical senses perceive, the one that is burdened with difficulties, or the one that your spirit is perceiving, its beauty, its beautiful mountains and its beautiful hills, right? The one that you long for. And then he continues by talking about the mountains. Is it what kind of mountain? Is it that same mountain about which poets like you, like both of them, like Gibran and Amin Ghayyib, have sang about before, beginning with prophets? So for him, here we have, what Gibran is making clear is that the profession of the poet is a divine calling. And it is rooted in prophecy. It is rooted in the missions of prophets like David and Solomon, Sulaiman. Right? And then he begins, and look how he transitions, beginning from prophets, David, Solomon, Ash'iyah, who is not a messenger but a prophet from the Israelites. And then he transitions to a priest, a reverend, or a monk, a Greek Orthodox priest, Germanos Farhat. Then he transitions to poets, who might be considered secular poets, like Lamartine and Najib Haddad. And so Gibran is establishing this idea that poets, what we would consider today to be secular poets, like Shakespeare, like Adonis, like Khalil Gibran himself, are not an exclusive group different than, they're not doing something completely different than what the prophets did. It's a gradual transition. They are in the same line of profession, vocation, and craft, of trying to call attention to the beauty of that which cannot be seen or heard or touched by the senses. That when the physical form around us crumbles and disappears and deteriorates and decays, whether due to politics, whether due to economy, whether due to religious turmoil, for whatever reason, there still remains the beauty of the spirit of a land and a place and a people that the poets are able to bring out through their writings. And that is why Gibran establishes it as a responsibility for Amin al-Ghayb to be able to perceive that Lebanon, the one that is beautified through imagination. أنت سوف تجيب على هذه السؤالات بمسائل طويلة إلى المهاجر وأنا سوف أقرأ كل كلمة منها. He knows his friend, so he says, you're going to answer all these questions in long letters in the form of articles that are going to be published in your magazine Al-Muhajir, and I will read every word of it. ولكن إذا كان هناك بعض الأشياء التي لا تريد أن تتكلم عنها أمام العموم, but if there are some things that you don't want to talk about publicly, أخبرني عنها برسائل خصوصية لكي أكون شريكا لك بأفكارك ومشاهدا بعينيك حقيقة لبنان. Look at this beautiful expression. And again, this goes back to this camaraderie, right? To this fraternity of poets in diaspora, and how important it is to have a support group of artists and poets. He says, but if there are some things that you don't want to talk about publicly, tell me about them, inform me of them in private letters, so I can be a partner with you in your thoughts. And this is the beautiful expression, and I can see through your eyes the beauty of Lebanon. And just to show you how much this poesis, this poetic line of thinking and beauty that Gibran is expressing here is a prophetically rooted tradition. We have examples from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. You know, for example, where he used to ask his companions to recite the Quran for him, to recite scripture, and they would ask, how can we recite it? When upon you it descended. And he said, I like to hear it from someone other than me. Right? Or when the Prophet's companion, Abu Bakr, may God be pleased with him, during the migration, he received some milk from a seller and he gave it to the Prophet. And he said, I saw the Prophet drink until my thirst was quenched. There is this intimate process of othering, of witnessing things through the eyes of another, right? And the type of knowledge and gnosis, deep sense of knowledge that is produced through that cannot be obtained through one's own eyes or one's own insight, right? So he says, I want to witness through your eyes the beauty of Lebanon. I want to witness through your eyes the beauty of Lebanon. Because what he sees, well, first of all, Gibran is not in Lebanon, right? Gibran is all the way in America and he's going to Paris. But Gibran had already told us that he doesn't need to be physically in Lebanon to witness Lebanon, because the most beautiful things are those not witnessed by the senses. And on top of that, he says that his spirit has grown such that it can full thousands of miles in mere moments. But this is something else. This is about witnessing beauty through the eyes of another. This is not about seeking rational knowledge. There is no rational knowledge to be obtained here. There is just simply this act of witnessing beauty. A pure witnessing act. And Gibran is giving us all these lessons for an artist. For the artist first and foremost, and then for the human being by extension, of how to live our lives meaningfully. Yeah? Such beautiful expressions that Gibran is using. أنا في هذه الأيام مثل صائم يترقب قدوم فجر العيد. And this here shows us how aware Gibran is of, as a Maronite Lebanese Christian, how grounded and well aware he is of Islamic rituals. Right? He says, I in these days am like a fasting person that is awaiting the coming of the dawn of Eid, the dawn of the holiday of breaking the fast. Of course, in Christianity, there is also a fasting, a 40-day fast. But either way, Gibran's words are not haphazard, right? He is also intending his awareness and his intimate adoption of the fasting of Ramadan and the breaking of the fast at the end of the month of Ramadan, which is considered an Eid for Muslims, to highlight what Muslims themselves should be doing in perceiving the depth of their own rituals. So why does Gibran feel like a fasting person who's awaiting the coming of the dawn of Eid? He says, لأن سفري إلى باريس يجعل أحلامي وأميالي حائمة حول الأعمال الكبيرة التي سوف أحاول إتمامها في عاصمة المعارف والفنون. He says, because my imminent traveling to Paris makes my dreams and my miles, أو أميالي, my inclinations could also be, roam around the big projects that I will try to accomplish in that capital of knowledges and arts. So Gibran here is giving us an inward interpretation of how fasting and breaking the fast and Eid should actually, what form of importance it should play in our lives. Imagine that in the lives of Muslims. It's not just a monthly, it's not just an annual ritual. It's not just a month that happens out of the year. You need to take that ritual as you do all your rituals. And with the reason we need an artist like Gibran is because they're able to decipher these hidden realities and symbolisms in the physical rituals of our lives. Be they of faith, be they of work, be they of nation, of family, of anything. So just as you fast, and then there is the Eid where you break the fast and you celebrate, Gibran is now, at this moment of writing this letter, he's experiencing a fast, awaiting a fast from what? From indulging in an overflow of arts and creativity and exposure and experience and taste. Awaiting the Eid, the moment when he steps foot in Paris, and indulges in the knowledges and the arts that that city has to offer. So this, he gives us a principle here, that anytime you are awaiting Remember, we talked about this idea of comfort and discomfort, or le futur and l'avenir, that Derrida establishes about the predictable future and the looming unpredictable future. And we said that the artist should schedule their le futur, their comfort space, the mood, for themselves to live in a space in order to be ready to receive l'avenir, that which is to come, the unexpected arrival, the looming arrival of the creative inspiration. So Gibran is giving us the principle here of this idea of le futur and l'avenir, right? You are fasting awaringly in your comfort space, because you are also, that gives you the ability to imagine what it will be like when that l'avenir, when the arrival comes. He's imagining what it will be like when the Eid comes, when he steps foot in Paris and enjoys the arts and the social groups and the social and the arts and the creativity and the social scene in Paris. Right? Imagine that. Khalil Gibran, a Maronite Christian, by all standards, a secular era poet, is giving us the principle of how to approach and understand the symbolism behind rituals in an Islamic faith. And as you know, as we mentioned, as a custodian of the Romantic period, Gibran did not feel that his faith is only Christianity. He perceived himself as a poet, as a human being, also a defender and a custodian of the Islamic faith and all other faiths. أخبرتك يا أمين قبيل سفرك بأنني سوف أصرف سنة كاملة في باريس، وأنا أخبرك الآن بأنني سوف أذهب إلى إيطاليا بعد انقضاء السنة، وأصرف سنة متجولا بين متاحفها العظيمة وآثارها القديمة، فأزور البندقية وفلورنسا ورومية وجنوة، ثم أعود من نابولي إلى أمريكا. We will stop there, but he's basically telling Amin that I told you that I'm going, after I spend an entire year in Paris, I'm going to go to Italy, and then I'm going to walk and roam between its great museums and its great ancient relics. And then I'm going to go to Florence and Rome. Then I'm going to go back to Napoli, and then to America. Right? And we will continue with this incredible letter, and this treasure trove of Gibran's writings tomorrow. But just just keep in mind these deep lessons that Gibran is offering us. These are lessons that are as pertinent now as they had always been over the past century. Right? And what makes, on a larger scale, I think what Gibran is showing us is that the importance of the artist is not only in the work that they produce. Right? The importance of the artist is not a lot of art. There might be many great artists who can produce great films or make great paintings or write great poetry or make great music. But the question is are you able to decipher from the lessons that you learn from your craft as an artist? Are you able to decipher then lessons also of how to be a great human being? Right? How does the craft of art making allow us to live our lives more meaningfully. And I think if we think about the greatest books of our time, for example, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, one of the best books, I think, for this idea of creative living, it's not only a book for artists, it's also a book about living creatively, living artistically. But it's this idea of, taking mundane, or not mundane, but specific rituals and techniques that each of us have developed in our lives, either through faith, through belonging to a school of thought, to a philosophy, things such as prayer, washing ourselves, ablution, recitations, whatever they may be, work ethic incorporations, and we're able to think about, place these in front of us, and to think about what they say about us as human beings, right? And that's what makes Gibran great, right? Because if you think about The Prophet, it's a novel, it's prose, but it's also poetic. But what really makes it great is that the content of it is that it's a book about living, the art of living, told in fiction, right? And I believe that this is the genius of Gibran that still remains until today. So I hope you enjoyed this session and this series, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Peace and love. Good night.